Hello everyone. So the next topic which we will be going to discuss is about the translocation of the mineral ions. So in this we will be discussing about the what are mineral ions and how the process of translocation takes place in the plants. So let's start with the first slide of introduction. So plants, they obtain their supply of carbon and most of their oxygen from CO2, that is in the atmosphere, and they obtain the hydrogen from the water, and rest of the minerals, they are picked up individually from the soil. So minerals, the plant's minerals play an important role in the growth and the development of the plant. So minerals exist in the soil as ions, and they cannot be directly they cannot directly cross the cell membrane. So the concentration of the ions is some 100 times more in root interior than in the soil. So the ions concentration is 100 times more, and all the minerals cannot be passively absorbed. So the minerals cannot be passively absorbed. So there is some process which is involved in the absorption of these minerals from the soil to the plants or to the roots of the plant. So the movement of ions from the soil to interior of the root is against concentration gradient, and that requires an active transport. So there are some specific ion pumps which occurs in the membrane of the root hair, and they pump mineral ions from the soil to cytoplasm of the epidermal cells of the root hairs. So in this, all of this process requires the energy, and this energy is provided by the ATP. So a small amount which passes into the root even without ATP, they must be through a passive technique. So there are two techniques which we will be discussing, that is the active technique and the passive technique. So passive technique we have already discussed. Now what is the active technique or active transport? It is when the ATPs are present over the plasma membrane of the root epidermal cells, and they establish an electrochemical proton gradient for supplying the energy for the movement of ions. So these ions are again checked and transported inwardly by the transport proteins present over the endodermal cells. And endodermis, they allows the passage of the ions inwardly but not outwardly. So endodermis is the inner layer of the cell, and that allows the passage of the ions. It also controls the quantity and type of ions to be passed into the xylem, and inward flow of the ions from epiblema to the xylem is along the concentration gradient. Now the collection of the ions in the xylem, it is responsible for the water potential gradient in the root, that helps in osmotic entry of the water as well as its passage through the xylem. So what happens in xylem? The minerals are carried up along with the flow of xylem solution. So in the leaves, the cells, they absorb the minerals selectively through the membrane pump. So the main function of the xylem is to transport the water and the minerals in the plants. So in the leaves also, the cells absorb these minerals but selectively through the membrane pump. Now how the process of translocation of mineral ions takes place in the plants. So minerals, they are remobilized from the older dying leaves to the younger leaves. So this phenomena can be seen in deciduous plants. Elements, for example, they are phosphorus, they are elements like nitrogen and potassium, they are easily mobilized because they are the macronutrients which are present in the larger quantity in the case of the plants. And the calcium, like elements like calcium, they are not remobilized. So the small amount of material exchange takes place between the xylem and the phloem. So there is a very small amount of material which is being exchanged in between the xylem and the phloem. If we talk about the xylem sap, there is a nitrogen which travels as an inorganic ion as well as an organic form of amino acids and related compounds. So there are very small amount of the P and S that are passed in the xylem as an organic compound. So There is also an exchange of material which is between the xylem and the phloem. So therefore the mineral elements pass through the xylem in both the inorganic and the organic form. So the when there is a exchange of materials between the xylem and phloem, there is a mineral element which pass through the xylem in both the forms, that is the organic form and the inorganic form. They reach the area of their sink, that is the root, namely young leaves, and they develop flowers, fruits and seeds, apical and lateral meristems and individual cells for the storage. So minerals, they are uploaded at fine vein endings through the diffusion, and they are picked up by the cells through the active uptake. Now there is always a remobilization of the minerals from the older senescing parts, in which the nickel plays a major role, and nickel have a prominent role in this activity. So senescing leaves, which means the leaves are at the death stage of the senescence stage is a death stage of the plant. So the senescing leaves send out many minerals like nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus and potassium, and these are incorporated into structural components and however not remobilized. Example, calcium. So these are not remobilized. So the remobilized minerals become available to young growing leaves and other things. It means the lower part of the plant, that is basically roots. So this was all about the translocation process in the plants, and what are the mineral ions. So this was all about it. These are some of the references.